Your rights and freedoms are slipping through your fingers, and you have the power to change that. It's all happening now, and it's time to realize that your individual action can bring collective, colossal change. People all around the world have stood up to fight for democracy. True democracy that works for the people and not for corporate profits or powerful dictators.
People are out here because they're furious at capitalism, they're furious at the ruling class.
Let's face it, we're fed up with an economic system that forces us to bear the impacts of the recklessness of the 1% and causes us to pay the real cost of destructive industries in the currency of our health and the hopes of our children.
There's just an overwhelming feeling of acceptance there.
It all started when a couple of Canadians from the anti-consumerist magazine Adbusters decided to propose a peaceful occupation of Wall Street starting September 17, 2011. The protest was aimed to target corporate influence on democracy, the absence of legal repercussions for the bankers behind the recent global financial crisis, and a growing disparity in wealth. Soon after the idea sprung, the internet was abuzz with tweets, posters, and video messages from all over the world. And on September 17, 2011, the Occupy movement was born in Zuccotti Park, which was privately owned and just so happened to be in the middle of New York's Wall Street financial district. On the first day, over 1,000 protesters marched through the streets, and Zuccotti Park was occupied by over 150 people overnight. The numbers quickly grew though, and soon enough the park was transformed into a flourishing community. New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg stated that he agreed with their right to protest and said they would be happy to make sure they have the locations to do so. But that didn't stop the police from making arrests during their marches. By September 24th, nearly 100 people had been arrested, and on October 1st, when protesters marched across the Brooklyn Bridge, another 700 arrests were reportedly made, even though the protesters remained peaceful. Once Occupy Wall Street started getting the media attention it deserved, and the rest of the world was turned on to what they started, Facebook and other social networking sites saw a flurry of occupations being organized. And on October 15th, the Occupy movement joined with the Spanish Indignados and the Greek protests, and together they staged rallies in over 900 cities around the world. Europe saw some of the largest turnouts, especially in Madrid, where 500,000 people took to the streets. Rome also saw around 200,000 people march in solidarity. But unfortunately, a large group of anarchists from all over Europe separated and started to riot and clash with police. By mid-October, occupations had spread to over 1,900 cities around the world. But their sudden growth in numbers and support for the movement caused many governments to start feeling the pressure. And on October 25th, the Occupy Oakland encampment was violently raided by police, resulting in over 100 arrests and several injuries to protesters.
There's no violence here. The police rolled through, destroyed our homes, destroyed our food tent where we were feeding people, destroyed our big tent where we were giving medical aid to
The next
people.
day, protesters returned to the streets, and the arrests and injuries continued.
They shot me up with rubber bullets.
Let's see it.
No joke.
Most notable was that of Marine veteran Scott Olson, who sustained a life-threatening injury when he was struck in the head by a tear gas canister fired at close range. And when fellow protesters came to his aid, another canister was deliberately thrown into the group of people trying to help him. As the violence and police aggression continued around the world, so did the raids and evictions on the occupied camps, leading to thousands of arrests and more cases of police brutality. On November 15th, Occupy Wall Street was raided and about 200 people were arrested. There was a media blackout of the event caused by the NYPD closing off all streets around the park and not letting anyone in or out, including the media.
Put your hands on me. I'm just doing my job. I have DCPD press passes.
Chiseling our privacies away one by one.
After Occupy Wall Street was evicted, the aggressive momentum by police was carried over throughout the world and attempts were made to evict the remaining occupations. Now, does this all seem familiar? The Chicago Democratic National Convention of 1968 followed the assassination of Martin Luther King and a breakdown in law and order that made it seem as if the country were coming apart. Distraught with the situation at hand with the Vietnam War and the current political state, protesters gathered in numbers remaining true to their beliefs and paid a heavy toll in a violent clash with police. 11 years later, during the battle in Seattle, protests came as a result of working class people being fed up with downsizing, wage stagnation, lost health benefits, and overall oppression from corporate greed that they have succumbed to for many decades.
How much can the person take? How far into the corner are we going to have to be backed into before we stand up and say, okay, enough is enough, we're not going to take this anymore? And that's why the aspect of nonviolence is so key in maintaining this movement.
What separates the Occupy protests from others in the past is their length, ability to remain peaceful, and the staggering globalization that is continually growing.
There's really big emphasis on making sure that the mainstream media and the independent media outlets, i.e. like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube like that, really knew that this was not the end of Occupy, it was only the end of a phase. We really did accomplish what we set out to do there. It was pretty much just gather everybody together, let them know that, hey, okay, now we're going to start having some dialogue, and just because we're not in the camp anymore doesn't mean that we can't stop that and move on to the next phase.
In this technology-savvy generation, the Occupy movement was born out of the world of blogging and forums, and continues to use the internet as its main source of outreach, available for the sharing of user-uploaded content that all supporters can access.
It really opened up a channel for people to really get the news of what was going on, when it was going on. It really gives an outlet to give the real, the unbiased, the news, the uncut news, as it happens, when it happens, and before the mainstream picks up on it.
As the 99% have become more consciously aware of our declining standard of living and the deteriorating conditions of our environment, it was just a matter of time before the world would turn to its current state of unrest.
The middle class is disappearing, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for people like you, like me, like anybody, to become more socially, upwardly mobile.
By virtually any measure that you take, individual income, family income, wealth, there's been growing inequality. That's true in Canada, it's true in the US, it's true in Western Europe, it's true in Japan.
Our buying power is going down, our earnings are going down.
What do we need to reverse the trend where the lowest income families are falling further behind?
We're having to work twice as hard today than we did a generation ago to maintain our standard of living.
One of the clearest patterns that emerges is differences in the income of individuals according to their training level, their educational level. I don't think human nature has changed that much in the last 30 years. I mean, what's happened, as we've always had, is we've had the business cycle. And so I think what's causing a lot of youth unemployment problems, well, in any recession, it's, last hired, first fired, right?
The livelihood of middle-income families is deprived from the cutting of jobs and outsourcing to foreign countries, a notion that only benefits the wealthy 1%.
Allowed corporations to have too much influence over government. We need a more responsible form of capitalism, because right now this unmitigated greed is extremely socially detrimental, and it's going to be getting worse and worse. Corporations are writing our policies and it's not helping.
Although the Occupy movement has been criticized as not having a clear message, it started with one clear goal.
The media really got hung up on the fact that if you asked 50 different people, you would get 50 different answers to what was wrong there, because we can all agree on one or two basic things. There is a massive amount of social and economic inequity that plagues our society today, perpetuated by faulty monetary and political systems that really need to be changed.
The institutional forces, minimum wages and unions that help to support earnings, especially among lower skilled workers, those protections have lost their power.
It's really a bad situation, and much of it relates to the deregulation of the financial industry. This pooling of money at the top is not trickling down, you know, and it's not being reinvested. It's instead being distributed among shareholders as extra dividends, right? And so the 1% keep the money, while the rest of the people who are workers and just regular people are finding it, are not, I guess, getting a fair deal out of it, you know?
If you're a publicly traded company, you have to be profitable to your shareholders. And that's the greed that's associated with capitalism that is really killing our society these days. Their sole obligation is to bring profit to the shareholders at any cost.
Excessive profit is the main ambition for the wealthy few, a goal only attained by the greed of some at the expense of many. So at this point, what has been achieved? It's got people thinking, and more importantly, acting and voicing their own issues. It shouldn't be looked at as a failure because the police stepped in and evicted the occupations. After all, the movement wasn't expecting an immediate victory. It is all about spreading awareness, showing that there are valid points to be made and that we must exercise our right to speak out and get together as a group to help create living standards that are just.
There's something seriously wrong in our culture that it's okay to just do whatever it is for money, for greed. But the only way to fight that is if good people stand up and say something. The entirety of our society, and I'm guilty of this too sometimes, is guilty of being kind of absorbed by our materialism, by just being on the internet, by just looking at your iPhone or your iPod, you know, and it's so easy to disconnect. It's so easy to stay at home and not do anything, or to just look at things, you know, in terms of as a spectator instead of a participant and actually taking responsibility. And that's what this is about.
When you join Occupy, you're given that outlet and that podium, that stage, to challenge the status quo that is out there, that false status quo that we live our everyday lives by.
All of us have the ability to speak out, put our boots on the ground, and at least be counted for as one of the 99% who have decided that we have had enough.
This is something personally I can do to feel like I'm doing something. You know, like it's a way to feel that you have some sort of control over your life, you know, because we have to take that back.
It has to be us, the people, the public, that really start to make the changes that we want to see ourselves.